Hello, Energy Strong Nation. Thank you for joining us today. This is Mike Umbro, your host. David Ramsden Wood is not able to make it this morning. He's coaching his son's golf team, so he's standing in and helping out. But I am so excited to be joined today by Meredith Angwin, author of Shorting the Grid, The Hidden Fragility of Our Electric Grid. She has an extensive history working in the environmental realm for various companies, the Electric Power Research Institute, where she led projects in renewable and nuclear energy. So I think it's just such a timely day and morning to be able to record with you, Meredith. And please, tell us, I guess, just briefly, what has motivated you to become an author? I think that must have been such an undertaking, and I want to know, for the listeners out there, what was your motivation to really take it to that level of research and spreading knowledge to the world?
Well, to become an author, I've always done some writing. I'm a chemist. I'm a physical chemist. I worked at pollution control projects and on corrosion control projects. That's the kind of thing physical chemists do. Mm-hmm. But I felt that there were some gaps in information. Well, let's start with the fact that I'm very pro-nuclear, and mm-hmm. I was defending Vermont Yankee, which is a power plant that closed. And I began writing a blog about Vermont Yankee called Yes, Vermont Yankee. Okay. And so I was following the information about Vermont Yankee wherever I could find it, sometimes newspapers, sometimes trade press. And every now and again, Vermont Yankee would have some kind of interaction with the grid operator, and I would research what does this mean? And I would write it up and so forth. So I ended up writing a bit about the grid, and somebody in the consumer liaison group of our grid operator is ISO New England. Okay. And it has a consumer liaison group that's supposed to be the consumer's voice in the energy markets. Now, it really isn't the consumer's voice in the energy markets, but I didn't know that. And I was happy to have joined it anyway, because it was as close to a consumer's voice as a person was likely to get. Right. So at any rate, he suggested I join it. Well, I joined it, and I began to get a deeper understanding than one blog post at a time about one power plant's interactions with the grid operator. And so I was in it for 4 years. I was actually writing a fair amount about the grid before, but when I joined the consumer liaison group, I realized that my knowledge had been very limited. Uh-huh. And in the consumer liaison group, I was able to see how things happened, and the various interest groups were there, and right. The grid operator was there, and we were concerned with various FERC rules, and mm-hmm. all of a sudden, and I began to realize that these FERC rules were not just FERC rules. They mm-hmm. had, groups in favor of them, groups against them. So I began to have a better understanding, and I also began to be worried, because it seemed to me that nobody really was responsible for the reliability of the grid. Mm-hmm. And that there were all kinds of different people, different activities, right. But the buck never stopped anywhere. Okay.
Right. I have a note here. The theme of this show that I was thinking about before we started, I thought, well, it really comes down to broken promises. There are all of these agencies, these environmental advocates or researchers or universities, and all of these big systems coming together, making us promises about what the future could be. But as you're talking about, really without a coherent and easy to understand strategy that's going to work.
Well, it isn't even that they have a strategy. What happens is I've been thinking about this a lot. It's very easy to learn about what I call the could grid. What could happen, what we could do, how we're going to work as soon as we get enough batteries installed, et cetera, how we're going to have 100% renewables. No, we're not going to have 100. We're going to have zero carbon.
Right.
I mean, so there's 100. If you pick up your Sunday paper or the equivalent, or listen to a news program, you can find out a lot about the could grid, the grid that we supposedly could have sometime in the future. It's extraordinarily hard to find out about the machinations and rules of the actual grid you have.
Right, exactly. It is extraordinarily hard. There's, you know, for me being in California, you've got the California Energy Commission, you've got CAISO, the California Independent System Operator, you've got, you know, the PUC, you've got, and it's like, for us, I'm, you know, I love doing the podcast, but I do have a day job, which is developing an energy project in West Kern County. And we're specifically looking at how can we address long duration energy storage. And just the learning process to investigate the market, to understand where the market is going, and to understand how it all fits together is in and of itself a full-time job.
Oh, it is totally a full-time job. And also, I don't mean to be discouraging to you, but basically you can't learn about the markets because they change them all the time.
Right.
I mean, you know, so whatever you know now could be overthrown in a new report followed by a new rule. I see.
I popped up, but can you see what I'm sharing here?
Yes.
I know it's not great for those that might be on the audio version of this, but the video, it'll be good. And for us to talk about it, but this is, you're talking exactly about what I'm looking at. And this is a source, Strategy Consulting, that did a long duration energy storage study and market outlook for the California Energy Commission. And so what this shows is daily California energy supply in 2045. And we see this huge bump up of solar that effectively squishes out all of the base load. And this blue shaded area, which is your storage in theory, that doesn't exist yet.
Right, it doesn't exist.
This is not here yet, but it's colored into this graph. But I think it's exactly what you're talking about. The policies almost have to change by nature because, you know, the technologies to get us here don't exist yet.
I agree with you. And I'm always a little distressed because I'll read an article and it'll say, what we need is low carbon dispatchable renewables.
Right.
Okay. What are they? Well, it depends. You know, they could be storage. They could be hydro. They could be, I'm like, okay, well, how many of them you need? You know, and they don't want to answer the question. I find that there's a lot of slogans, you know, 100% this, zero carbon that, and there's no really, there's not even an assessment, much less a plan of how we're going to get there. I mean, a plan would be one thing, and someone will say, no, the market will do it. But the market isn't really a market, I'm sorry to say. I mean, the market is, the rules of the market are constantly being changed. And so it's not, in my book, I have a lot of examples, which I try to simplify things, where I imagine somebody who's growing zucchini and bringing it to the farmer's market. And that's a market, you know.
I love the farmer's market. My wife and I are there, not as much as we should be with the kiddos, but it's the best.
Yes, it's the best.
Buy local.
Buy local. But the thing is that when you get right down to it, there are two people there maybe vending their zucchini, and they have to keep some control of the price and the quality, or nobody will buy their zucchini.
Right. Nobody wants soft, rotten zucchini.
Right. So what I'm saying is a market has its own rules that are rules of what are people willing to buy.
Right.
and how much are they willing to spend and what quality they want. But the markets, the supposed markets in the energy sector aren't like that. I mean, they have all kinds of rules that change all the time. For example, in New England, we have a capacity market. And so a capacity market, the general idea is that we have one market for energy that is in a kind of real-time market. We look at how much energy how much kilowatts we're going to need and how much kilowatts are available. And the grid operator matches them up, trying to choose the lowest cost kilowatts first, okay? Sure. Then we have a capacity. Then we discovered this didn't work because what happens is that there's no incentive for somebody to build a new power plant or of any kind because they don't know how much pay they'll get for the kilowatts from that plant. So we have a capacity market. We say, we'll give you so much for just having the capacity there ready to go when we need it. Okay.
Right. So we can't pay you all the time, but when we need you, you better be ready.
That's right. And we're paying you something all the time. We're paying you something in the
to keep you alive
all the time to keep you alive. Well, okay, so here comes a power plant, and it has it's getting a capacity payment, and then it turns out that the grid needs its power, and it can't come online, or it won't come online. It can't or won't because it either can't get natural gas. It's a natural gas plant, or it has to pay too much for the natural gas and doesn't think that the market will pay it back.
Well, that's coming, isn't it? At $10
oh yeah, and the thing is, the natural gas plant is what's called a merchant generator. Now, when you actually worked in the old days, and I'm not saying the old days were completely right, they had their problem, but the idea was that if you didn't get energy, you knew who to blame. You went to your utility, which was supposed to have either bought part of the generator and make sure, and bought other generators output, and bought space on the transmission lines, and have the distribution lines and the billing in your house, in your house. Okay, they were in charge of it, and if they didn't provide reliable electricity, they would be fined. Well, the merchant generator, it's just one of a whole bunch of generators. It isn't going to be in any particular trouble if it says, well, I'm sorry, I can't afford to do this.
Right. Well, right now, in California, they're adding all these gas peaker plants, and they're adding even, diesel generators, and and it's causing. So I would love to, hear your take about how, these issues are coming up. We're adding back these fossil, generation, stations, temporary, permanent, whatever we want to call them. And then from a pollution standpoint, from your perspective and your history as a pollution expert, what is that doing to our disadvantaged communities who are now, now instead of clean nuclear generation, they're getting exhaust effectively in their neighborhoods?
Well, that's true. I mean, I don't know the situation as well in California, but in New York, they closed down the Indian Point power plant, which was nuclear, and provided about 1,000. It was a double plant, or two plants really. It provided about 1,000 high-paying jobs. Okay, and they closed it down because they're like, oh well, it might be hurting the fish or something. So where are they building the gas-fired plants? They're building them in disadvantaged communities because that's where they can build them.
Right.
I mean, a well-organized, wealthy community, and you say, oh, I'm going to build a gas-fired power plant here, they're going to be like, no, you're not.
Exactly. I mean, no, that ain't happening. That ain't happening here. No, my golf club is right here. I can't have that ugly view off the 19th hole. I'm not having it. Yeah, I get it. So it's the same in New York as it is in California. Surprise, surprise.
Yes. So I mean, I don't I prefer nuclear power to other kinds of power. It's low pollution. It's very reliable in terms of fuel supply. That is,
Right.
if you load a nuclear plant with a fuel, it has the fuel to run for 18 months. One load of fuel runs it for 18 months. Actually, it can run it longer.
I didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't know that timeline. That's impressive. And
so the thing is that the nuclear plant, if you say, oh, there's a gas crisis on, the gas-fired plants may not be able to get gas. Well, the nuclear plant doesn't have a fuel problem.
Right. There's no supply chain, issues there.
Yeah, I mean, and if there were supply chain issues, you've got a whole bunch of months to think about how to solve them.
Absolutely.
So let me give you another example. People keep talking about nuclear as very compact and energy dense, and I do understand that, and it is. But the thing is that the numbers that are thrown around are like billions of pounds of, billions of tons or millions of tons of carbon dioxide, compared to, and then someone else will say, well, there's tons of nuclear waste. And
right.
I mean, it just, so pretty soon your head is kind of spinning with these
right.
numbers. It's like trying to figure out, are the, how expensive was COVID, and
right.
you can get a lot of different numbers on that. So what I try to do is just give an example of two power plants near me. Okay. Well, the first power plant was Vermont Yankee, and it made 620 megawatts of energy, and it refueled every 18 months. Okay.
Yep.
And then there was the power plant, one of the last coal plants in this area in New Hampshire, Merrimack Station, and it made about 420 megawatts of power. And every day, and it refueled every day that it was running. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at every 18 months, two semis would pull up to Vermont Yankee with the fuel.
Right.
Every day that it was running, 40 coal cars full of coal, 100 tons of coal each, came over to Merrimack Station.
Right.
And they told me that at Merrimack Station when I visited, and I said, well, okay, they're telling me this. And I went home and I was like, okay, let me look at the heat content of coal, the heat rate for a cyclone fired boiler. Let me see. And I came up with 39 and a half coal cars a day.
Okay.
I mean,
you're right there.
So yes, it is, so now if somebody says to me, well, look at the nuclear waste. Well, it's 1.5 semis worth every 18 months.
Right. Well, and I think, I agree. Yeah. What about the coal cars? And there's not that much of a footprint when you think of it in those terms. In California, we had San Onofre right here. I'm born and raised in San Diego. San Onofre was shut down prematurely due to some maintenance issues. Now, it costs money to maintain these facilities, but if you're really looking at a science-based approach that you're using of, okay, what are the total inputs versus what am I getting out, and what is the net impact on the environment, nuclear has a very strong case. And if anything, we're seeing now Diablo Canyon in Central California, they can't decide in Sacramento. Are we keeping it? Are we not? How do we position ourselves so we don't have egg on our face and have worse blackouts? And it's just the lack of strategic planning, I think, is the biggest impediment to pulling off the transition, or even part of the transition that we think we're going to have.
Well, you see, the thing is that, I mean, look, in the old days, and I understand that in the old days, we often had what we called a gold-plated grid, because the owners of the utilities were paid a percentage of their installed capacity capital. So it was one of the few businesses that buying more stuff would almost automatically get you more profit. because you were allowed a profit depending on how much capital you had. So everybody was like, we've got to get rid of this gold-plated thing. Well, the thing about the gold-plated thing is that it turns out, in my book, I don't know if you've read it, but the areas that are still running that way tend to be less expensive nowadays, because the non-gold-plated, the RTO areas that are running auctions, they end up having to have such a lot of redundancy and so much complication and so many lawyers involved. And for example, our RTO in New England has asked for, I think it's a $20 million a year increase in its funding because it wants to redo the market rules.
Oh, that sounds open and honest.
Right, but I'm trying to say this isn't about buying zucchinis. If you need another 20 million in funding in order to redo market rules, this isn't about just looking and seeing this is zucchini work.
Clearly you're not the best zucchini farmer in town if that's what you need to have happen.
Well, the rules are such that one of the things that bothered me about the rules is that I named my book Shorting the Grid after the book, in homage to the book, to The Big Short, because in The Big Short, one of the things that was going on was that the rules were so elaborate that nobody could really follow them, but they ended up being that lending money to an itinerant worker who couldn't repay it was as good a deal, or maybe better, than lending money to a cardiac surgeon for his house.
Wow.
It turns out that on the grid, making reliable power is not a way to make money. The way to make money is to get subsidies, and the people who have been best at getting subsidies have been the people providing the least reliable power. Now, whether you like solar or don't like solar, you have to admit that it goes away half the day at best.
Exactly. And wind is worse. You know, are you on Twitter?
Yes.
So I make this joke. I make this joke comparing pickleball. I've got my pickleball racket and my pickleball here to, the tennis players hate that pickleball is, taking over their culture and I feel like we as energy producers, certainly those of us in oil and gas, feel as though, this inferior technology is coming and there's nothing we can do to stop it. It's happening whether we like it or not. And that's kind of how I relate pickleball to wind energy. And I ran a poll and said, what's going to have a more positive impact long-term on society, pickleball or wind energy? And it was 76% said pickleball. So I'm
well, they're right.
Exactly.
Because pickleball is available to a wider range of fitness levels than tennis is. I mean, that's what it boils down to, and that's why it's become so popular.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, in some ways, tennis, in terms of the expense of a court, tennis isn't an elite sport, but in terms of how fit you have to be, it is.
Exactly.
And well, pickleball isn't.
Yeah, I know. And it gives it's really an example that I bring it up for some fun, but also an example of the market is choosing pickleball for those benefits. Hey, I can play it anytime. I can play it with my aunt, my uncle, whoever I want to. It's a fun for everybody. And right now, on the renewable side and where we're going with reliability and affordability, it's not fun for everybody. And we're not picking wind and solar by choice, although we're voting in the politicians that are ramming it down the ratepayers' throats with all the agencies. But it's not a choice like pickleball.
No, it's not a choice. It isn't a choice. And it isn't the least expensive energy or anything. People begin saying things like that. Oh, it's the least expensive energy. And yet, as more and more wind and solar get on the grid, the price to the consumer goes up because the grid becomes harder to balance. You have to have more redundancy because the wind and solar aren't there all the time. I use an example sometimes. I say, okay, let's say you have a traditional grid. You've got thermal plants on it, coal plants, hydro plants, nuclear plants and stuff. The way you do that grid is you say to yourself, we want to have 120% more or less of the highest demand on the grid. We're going to have installed capacity of 120% of the highest demand on the grid.
Which pushes out your base load.
Yeah, no, that'll be okay. If you have thermal plants, then you have 120% of the highest thermal and hydro. So what happens is that if one plant isn't available, you still have everything covered. Sure. Okay, because you have 120%. If you have wind and solar, you have to have at least 200 or maybe even 300% because you install wind, but it isn't there all the time. You install solar, but it isn't there all the time.
Right.
So you can't assume that you're only going to lose 10% of your generating capacity. You might lose 100% on a still night.
Right. Or just because it's night and the batteries are only going to last you 4 hours. So you got another 8 hours in nighttime. I looked it up this morning because I woke up about 5 before my kiddos and I was thinking about this. So I looked at Kaizo's report and we were almost 9% nuclear. We had 26% just imports. So I think we know what that means. 8% large hydro, 40% natural gas. So between natural gas and imports, we're at 66%. And we did have 15% renewable, but the wind was working last night. So that was the breakdown when I woke up and I needed coffee, eggs, cartoons, all before the sun came up.
Yes, absolutely true. And that is the break. Now, you understand that I consider, have you heard of my little fatal trifecta idea?
Yes, I was reading about, please tell the Energy Strong audience about it. I loved it when I was reading about it.
Okay, well, the thing is that I look at what is a fatal trifecta for a grid. Well, the first part of the trifecta is that you have renewables, too many of them, a lot of them. Yep. Which go on and off when they want to go on and off. They have nothing to do with the load. If you've ever been in a grid operator's control room, you know that they're following the demand on the grid very, very carefully because they have to tell plants to go online and offline to match the demand.
You got to balance everything.
It has to be totally balanced. Right. So meanwhile, the wind and solar going on and off what they want. Sure. So what you need is fast response power plants to take up when they go off when you don't want them to. Yep. So what are these fast response power plants? They're gas. Yep. That's what they are. Right. Steam plants such as coal or nuclear can load follow very nicely, but they're not fast response.
Right. You can't just fire it up in a moment's notice.
Yes. And so the thing you can do that with is gas-fired plants. Yep. So they have gas-fired plants. So the second thing is, in a fatal trifecta, is you depend on gas. You get to gas to be 40%, 50%.
Yep, which is what we just taught. Yep, which is where we were at with California. So we're 2 for 2.
Yes. So one of the things about gas, though, is that it's delivered just in time. It's not stored on site. And so if there's a problem with a compressor, if there's a problem with for example, in the Northeast and in the central area of the country during the winter, you need gas is diverted to homes. Homes have first call on it. So
Yep.
the power plants can't necessarily get gas. And so at any rate, the second part of the fatal trifecta is you depend on gas all the time, and you may not be able to get it either
Right.
because of, it gets too expensive, or the
Yeah,
home-
I was going to say, if you can get it, half of it's going to Europe or more. I was just reading the Wall Street Journal. The backlog on orders for LNG ships it's like 256 are planned to be built. I mean, they can't build the LNG ships fast enough. So now all our gas is going to be shipped overseas, and it's going to be astronomically expensive here at home. And people have no idea how that's going to hit their utility bill.
I mean, it turns out that in the Northeast, we get about 30 shiploads of LNG a year.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah.
And none of them come from this country.
Right.
Because of the Jones Act, you can't, you have to use an American flag ship to move something from one American port to another. And we don't have any American flagged LNG ships. And so all the LNG is imported.
Wow. Unbelievable, isn't it?
Okay,
yeah,
so that's the
second. So the third, I interrupted.
And the third one is that you're going to, if all else fails, you'll get energy from your neighbors.
Right, which that doesn't work when the whole Southwest is 108 degrees.
No, it doesn't work when the whole Southwest is 108 degrees. I mean, all kinds of people were saying, well, Texas would have been all right if it had been connected to the grid. Well, the Southwest Power Pool and so forth were having problems of their own. They weren't going to export to Texas. Yeah, as a matter of fact, we have a similar situation here in New England, because we depend on Hydro-Quebec, and Hydro-Quebec actually begins importing power from from Ontario, and sometimes from New England in the depths of winter. So we can't just say, oh, well, if we can't get gas because homes are using it, we'll get electricity from Hydro-Quebec. No.
Right. Nobody wants to be in the dark.
Nobody wants to be in the dark. And I consider that one of the first rules of being a grid operator is take care of your own people first.
I love that. I think, a local solution for local people paying for the local product and the local service company. Yes.
And you have to take care of them first. If nothing else, they vote for the legislatures who control the grid operator ultimately.
Yeah, you're going to be gone. You're going to be gone. Well, and that's what happened. I was an undergrad at Pepperdine at the time in 2001, but we had rolling blackouts, and Gray Davis was recalled, shortly thereafter. The people do not like to be in the dark, and they will get rid of you if you're a political leader. I have a couple questions that I wanted to be sure to ask you. Okay. I know you talk about in your book, climate change. And the question I have around this, and it ties into your last statement about the responsibility is to kind of protect the local market, but what role do grid operators and energy producers have to solve climate change? I mean, do we have the tools to solve it, or does the responsibility really fall in, and I'm leading you, in my opinion, with, less consumption, frankly, and proper planning. But what role do the grid operators have in fixing the climate?
The grid operators is a kind of a squishy concept. I'm not clear exactly who is the grid operator.
Let's talk agencies as a whole. Let's just lump government and agencies, because they're basically government-run entities at this point.
Well, the government-run entities could encourage a build out of nuclear, and that would solve a lot of problems. Now, you understand that the rhetoric is all like, we have to get to 100%. Well, look at right now, as you said, in Vermont and in California, we're like 80% fossil, right?
Right.
So, if we got to being 40% fossil or 30%, that would be a big improvement, right?
Huge.
So the trouble is that everybody has got this sloganeering going along. So there's a man in New York who's done an analysis of how much electricity is base load. That is, it has to be there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
That's a good way to look at it.
It just looks at not, and it turns out that he looked at every different area of New York. He looked at New York City, he looked at the Genesee area, he looked at the middle of New York, which is pretty much farms, and every place, about 60 to 70% was of the electricity that was used was electricity that has to be there 24 hours a day. And so if you had nuclear for that, you'd have a lot of problems solved.
Right.
The next thing is, well, what do you do about the others? Well, you know, you could use a mixture. It would be expensive, but you could use a mixture of hydro, solar, some natural gas, and it would be a lot cleaner grid than now.
Right.
So it is not inevitable that we are going to go away from, we're going to go to 100% renewables. It is a policy that has been put in place by people who have not looked at the end game of the policy. We can see some of the end game right now in England, in Germany.
Sure.
We can see that they, now you say, well, look, you know, they're dealing with Russia, and Russia doesn't want to supply them natural gas. So, you know, it's not like that here. And I'm going to say, yeah, we're dealing with Canada, and Canada is very reliable when they're not having their own problems.
Right. Right. And we could have the reliability. We have the resources in New York, or we have the resources in California, whether they're fossil fired, and it's, like you said, a smaller percentage, which is an improvement. And we're chasing this perfection. We're chasing the perfect game. And as a result, to get to the perfect game, you're paying the highest price, and it's prohibitively expensive. And so it's sad for me to see, but I think you're exactly right. It's not inevitable that we're going to get to 100% renewables. I don't think it's even possible, personally.
No, it isn't possible. It isn't. But, you know, I don't like to say that to people because people get annoyed. As a matter of fact, when I first wrote my book, I wanted to talk about how the auction process, when I first began conceptualizing shorting the grid, I wanted to show how the auction process was distorting our markets and so forth. And I didn't actually want to talk about renewables much because people say, oh, you're just bashing them. And I discovered I could not talk about the markets without talking about the fact that the subsidized renewables have a huge effect on the markets.
Right. You have to talk about it. And so it's just factual. Yeah. It's
just factual. And I decided, okay, so somebody will say you're bashing renewables. Fine, let them say that. And meanwhile, you can look at, if anybody wants to, they can go to energymap.org, and they can look at the carbon content of the power produced in different countries. And you can look and you can see that Sweden and France are usually green, very low, and Ontario, very low carbon power. All of those, well, mostly Sweden has a mixture of hydro and nuclear. France is mostly nuclear. Ontario is hydro and nuclear. Okay, that's why they're green. You go to Germany, they spent like $500 billion on renewables. They're not green. They're full of natural gas and
from Russia.
Why are they so panicked about the natural gas thing, for Pete's sake?
Right.
If the new renewables had been able to do it.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I just feel you can look at it as a sweet thing, that is, we're looking for perfection, or you can look at it as a bad thing, which is slogans are not plans.
Right. And slogans lead to, again, broken promises. And that's where, unfortunately, this is ending for everybody worldwide with this contagion under these slogans. So I guess the last question, I know we've talked about, nuclear and some of the fixes and how some of these, green grids are relying on nuclear. How do we help the consumer buy local? I'm big on buying local and responsibly sourcing our energy. Do you see a day where policymakers really start to say, okay, American public, Vermont public, California public, we shouldn't be getting our energy from Saudi Arabia. We shouldn't be getting our energy from Russia. We should be doing everything we can to buy local, to support the local zucchini farmer, the local energy producer. Do you see that day coming? I feel like we started to see it when the invasion in Ukraine happened and everybody said, oh, wow, where's all the Russian oil going? And everybody mapped it and then it kind of dies off. But how do we help the consumer buy local over the long term, I guess, is the simplified question.
Okay. Well, you see, the thing is, you have to produce local first. Now, one of the things is that, as I say, you can build nuclear plants. Another thing you can do is you can, the whole business where the president told the oil industry that he was going to shut them down, and then the next day he's over in Saudi Arabia asking them to increase their production of oil.
Right. And then just the other day, the Saudi prince says, wait, the market's going down. We need to cut our production. So it's
right. What is this? The Saudi prince is going to take care of his own people and his own profits before he begins thinking about what America needs. Right. America has to be ready to meet its own needs with either purchases or homegrown, and homegrown is better because homegrown is something that we're really lucky to have. I was trying to write something. I said it's really good if energy can be self-sufficient, but many countries can't pull that off. If they're a small country without fossil resources and maybe a small flat country without hydro, they're not going to be able to be even partially energy self-sufficient. And I guess the thing is I get very the other thing I want is that I don't like to batter the consumer with guilt tripping about using energy.
Right.
That isn't, if you come out here, you will discover that people often drive their cars a lot.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and same out here too. I just did a road trip to Colorado. I didn't see many EVs.
But something, even if you are just a really careful person and you don't want to hurt the world and you're not going to do a road trip to Colorado because it's evil, you might be a plumber who lives in White River Junction.
Yep.
And if you're living in White River Junction, you can't count on the town of Hartford, a total of 11,000 people, to support your trade.
Yep.
You have to be willing to travel.
Absolutely. And
if you're a drywall person, what I'm trying to say is people in rural areas actually need their cars for many, many things. And for example, I happen to live like 8 miles or so from a really big hospital. A lot of people live a lot further. That's why that hospital has a helicopter.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely. And, people have to get where you're mentioning this. I'm on my way right when we stop recording this straight to Bakersfield from San Diego. And that's 220 miles. And I don't have time to charge halfway, which is what it would take because they don't tell you there's elevation changes and it's really hot out and the batteries don't last. So
of course not.
It's people have to get to where they got to go for work, leisure, or whatever they're doing. And it's just a fact of the matter. Well, thank you. Is there anything, I want to be sure people have an opportunity, where can people buy your book and follow you and just be engaged with your blogging and future work?
Oh, great. Thank you for asking. You can get my book you could go to your local bookstore and ask them to order it. They almost certainly won't have it in stock, but they can get it from Ingram Spark.
Perfect.
If you are on Amazon, you can get it on Amazon. You can also get it at Walmart. You can get it
Nice.
all kinds of places.
Good.
I mean, you have to order it there because they don't have a bunch of, you know, it's a kind of niche book, you know, and so you can order it online, and then the audiobook is just available. So I really like that. I love it because it's good for commuters.
I love audiobooks, right? I've read your book, but I love audiobooks too.
and the man who reads it, Eric Meyer, is the founder of Generation Atomic, and he left.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
And he decided to be an advocate for nuclear energy, and he left a budding career in opera. He has a great voice.
Oh, I'm gonna download the book just to listen to it again then.
Yeah, and it's available on Audible. It's also available on all kinds of other. I don't even know the names of all the different services you can get it from.
So they need to search.
You can get it from Apple Books,
right? Shorting the Grid by Meredith Angwin, and they'll find it. Absolutely.
Meredith Angwin and Shorting the Grid. Let me also say that if you go to my meredithangwin.com, pretty easy to remember, I have a blog. I don't really blog often enough, but there are some good posts on that blog.
I've enjoyed it. Yeah.
And then you can also sign up on that blog, on that website rather, for my email list, and I will send you an email. And then you can follow me on Twitter at Meredith Angwin.
I don't follow you yet. I need to follow you. I'm going to do that right when we stop recording. But on behalf of the Energy Strong Nation and our family, and hopefully this goes beyond that group of professionals, but thank you for what you're doing to research a very important topic, and one that I think is at the top of everybody's minds. And if it's not today, it will be come winter. So thank you. Yes. Thank you very much, Meredith, for being on the Energy Strong podcast. We appreciate you.
And thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, have a great day. Thank you so much.